All right, good evening, everyone. Dan Gordon from Flash Fire with our second seminar for the year. We've got a few more after this. I was actually pulling it up and then got distracted. So we have tonight, obviously, leadership under fire, which I'll get into in a minute. The next one's going to be January 27th. We're going to go over the kind of the floods in the fall. Actually, I think it was August, but definitely unprecedented for the area. So we're going to go through that both on the, as I said, the micro level all the way up to the macro level. So kind of everything from the operations boots on the ground to we may even get up to like the EOC and kind of like the overall incident management of it. And that's all going to be from people that were there and responding. Then February 11th, we're going to be doing the wildfire season, another kind of unprecedented for the area. So we're going to have Mike Cronick in from the Western Connecticut. I forget exactly what his title is, but he kind of handles all the wildfires and stuff on that end. And then we will be rounding it out February 24th, the high point or high risk seminar, which is going to be kind of a rescue related one with regards to using your aerial tower ladder, those types of things as a high point. What should you know? What can you get away with? Some of the kind of math and physics behind that. So hopefully those will be pretty good. Again, all free. They are starting at 7:45. Zoom only gives you the ability to do 7, 7:30, 8 o'clock. But just for honestly getting my kids to bed and stuff, 7:45. And I've heard from a few of you that it's nice to be able to 7 to 7:30 is bedtime, get them to bed, grab a beer and log on. So without further ado, a friend of mine and a coworker, Dan Salfrank, works for Leadership Under Fire. Really, where this kind of came from, and you guys may have heard of Leadership Under Fire. I would say it's a pretty well-known kind of entity out there. And we do, the fire service does a lot of training on firefighting, right? Tactics and things like that. And really, within the last few years, there's been I don't want to say a shift, but a real awareness on the mental side, right? So not just the physical nature of it, but the mental side of it as well, and how the physical plays in part to the mental side also. So obviously, if I was more in depth on it, I would give the seminar. I am not. So let's turn it over to Dan. So thank you for joining us, Dan. And what do you got for us? You're muted. So.
All right. Good evening, everybody. As Dan stated, my name is Dan Salfrank. And thank you all very much for joining us tonight. This is a pretty cool, unique opportunity. We're going to be talking about a bunch of different things in terms of human performance and some leadership principles. I just kind of wanted to start off with Dan, by the way, just let me know if anything's not working here. Um,
No, I see you fine. You just have a lot of like drawings. I don't know if you did that or I did, but
I'm not sure where they came from. That's not on my
they're all
screen.
drawings. All
Yeah,
right, there
there,
we
there
go.
they go. All right. You're just seeing the PowerPoint, right? Not the my whole screen.
We see the PowerPoint. I think it looks fine. So yeah.
Okay. All right,
Oh, and I'm
great.
sorry. One thing I forgot to mention, guys, that haven't been and haven't done a seminar before. If you have questions as we go, it's not a classroom where you can just kind of put your hand up. So the chat window works really well for that. If you have anything that you want to add or any questions that you have, just put them in the chat window. I monitor that, and then I can kind of insert them at the time where it's needed. So just use that chat window, and it works really well for this.
All right, great. So as Dan stated before, we're coworkers. We work together for a bunch of years now, and so I'm going to kind of just introduce myself a little bit with some of my backstory in terms of where I kind of came from. I grew up just outside of Philadelphia, and I started out in the on the Pennsylvania side. Um, and I started out as a volunteer, which is represented by that upper left picture right there in a typical suburban volunteer fire company. I kind of grew up in a firehouse. My dad was a volunteer pretty much my entire life growing up. And then fast forward to August of 2001, I joined the Pennsylvania National Guard as a crash rescue fireman, and that's evident down there in the lower right. And that was obviously a couple weeks after that, the world and my Air Force trajectory drastically changed. Um, in 2002, I had the opportunity to take the test for New York City, and I was fortunate enough to get hired in 2006. And I was initially assigned to a ladder company in Brighton Beach, which is in South Brooklyn next to Coney Island. And after a few years there, I was fortunate enough to transfer to ladder 176. Just it was a little bit of a busier area. And moving forward from that, in 2016, I got promoted to lieutenant, which is then when my paths kind of crossed with Dan. And I ultimately got assigned to Ford Truck in Midtown Manhattan. A couple years ago, I got promoted to captain, and I'm now currently back in Brooklyn. I don't have a permanent firehouse or company, but I'm just kind of bouncing around, filling in some vacation and medical leave spots. So I feel like I've had a lot of very fortunate opportunities to kind of see a variety of the American fire service in a lot of different ways, and I kind of think it's sort of rounded me out to where I am now. I've been involved with leadership under fire for about 6 or 7 years, I suppose. And it's been a pretty awesome opportunity, and it's very much reframed the way I kind of approach the fire service and what I do. Um, let's let's get that in chat.
No, I got that's just me.
All right, my mistake. All right, yeah. So I think it's been a pretty profound in the way it sort of reframed my approach to the fire service. So, kind of the arc of this discussion that we're going to have. Number one, I encourage anybody to participate. It definitely makes it a lot easier for me. And then as well, I think it'll just be better for everybody. So, there's going to be a couple of questions that I sort of throw out there, a couple thought exercises that I'm really hoping we get a little bit of participation with. Like you said, it'll just kind of make more sense as we go through. So, moving forward, what is why is this thing? All right, what is the most important tool on this rig? Is there anybody? Thoughts, comments?
Fireman.
Right, and why? Why is that?
They're the ones that have to use everything on the rig to its capacity, both conventionally and non-conventionally, to finish a task.
Yeah, that's a perfect answer, right? Um, the rig is useless without somebody with a head to operate it, right? Because at the end of the day, firefighting is still absolutely a human endeavor. There's been nothing created in the world yet to put us out of business, put us out of work. So it's one of those things that we have to keep in mind that at the end of the day, if we can have the fanciest rigs, the fanciest tools, all the greatest equipment, but if you don't have capable, competent, mentally prepared firefighters, you're not going to be you're not going to be ready to go. So, sort of the genesis of Leadership Under Fire. It was founded by Jason Bresler. He's the Marine photographed here. Um, he he had the opportunity to go to Afghanistan and Iraq and operated in a pretty high level in terms of combat, and had a lot of unique experiences and met a lot of very influential people. And when he came home, he kind of started looking at the fire service and the FDNY in particular, and realized that there was really something that was missing. And Dan somewhat alluded to it previously, right? So there was really something that was missing from the American Fire Service, and we had the ability to understand that, like from the physical fitness standpoint, I think most people would understand that there's a reasonable level of physical fitness, functional fitness that is required to do what we do. And then we have tactics and procedures and research about all the other facets of how buildings operate, respond under fire conditions, all the technical rescue instructions and procedures. We had all that stuff, but we were just really missing. There was one thing that was really missing, and that was, if we're saying that the most important person on this fire truck right here is the people riding it, then how are we supposed to understand how we work under these situations, right? So that was a that's a very brief notion of the genesis of LUF, right? It kind of started out a little bit with the intention of being on a hands-on type of scenario, hands-on training company. And it very quickly got redirected, and now we very much focus on human performance and leadership. If anybody's familiar with the FDNY, we have it's called the Mental Performance Initiative. And that was what it was named when it started back in 2016. And I think if we had the opportunity to rename it now, it's a little bit of a misnomer with the Mental Performance Initiative because it's really human performance. It's everything. It is the mental game for sure, but it's also the physiological, physical, how we operate, the emotional aspect of it. When you put all that together, that's what you really get this ideal um, approach to what we're looking for here. Does anybody have any ideas where this mental aspect of this all came from? So where it came from originally was really professional sport. Um, that was they if you go back 15, 20 years ago, they were all starting to get into the mental higher and mental skills coaches and things like that. And the reason largely being as a result of it was money. They obviously you get that next edge, right? They can get the most physically fit players and the most talented players and things like that. But there was one little thing that was missing, and that was the mental component of it all. And it really wasn't as little as I think they thought originally. And now you'd be hard pressed to find a professional or collegiate, certainly Olympic sports, any of those groups that are not going to have a full blown mental skills staff. So we're going to do the next one. We're going to do a little exercise here, and this is where we're definitely going to need some participation. There's two more that we're really looking for some participation. So what we'll do, I think the best way to do this is we're going to put it in the chat, and I'm going to ask Dan to kind of monitor the chat. And after like a minute or two, a couple minutes, and you guys get some submissions in, we'll read them off, and we'll go from there. So what we're doing here, this is kind of like a dream team scenario where you're going to a fire of consequence, a career type fire, and you have the opportunity to pick whoever you want to go with you to this fire. Could be somebody that you worked with in the past, somebody you're working with currently, somebody you've never worked with, but you know, like maybe they work in an adjacent department or something like that. Just that individual that I think we all have one or two or three in our minds of like who we want to go to a fire with. And I want to just why? Why do you want to go to that fire with that individual? I don't care who they are. You need to know who they are. But what is it about them? What attributes do they represent that makes you want to go to a fire with them? So, like I said, just throw some
Yeah, so
stuff.
I put that, so chat window, guys, throw that in there. Or some of you have my number. If it's easier, just text me. And that whatever you put in the chat's just going to go to me and Dan. So it's not going to be everyone's going to see what you put. But if you take a minute, do that. And this, I've done this. It is very interesting. So if you guys could take a minute and throw that in there, that'd be great. So is the attributes of someone you want to go to a fire with, correct?
Yeah, exactly.
Promise the homework's limited tonight.
Just makes it a lot easier when we have a little conversation going, even if it's a chat digital conversation. So, Dan, when you get like five or six different ones, we'll
Yep.
start with that.
Sounds good. They're coming in now.
Yeah, perfect.
If we were on YouTube, this is when the awkward advertisement would come in right now. All right. So thank you guys. We got if you want to keep putting in, that's fine, but these are some of the ones we got. Can you see them also, Dan, or no?
I cannot.
Okay.
I'm a little bit.
So calm, skill, grit, determination. You know what? I'll put them in. Can you see the chat when I do it or no?
Yeah, no, you're good. You're good. Yeah,
Okay.
just read them out. Yeah.
Calm, skill, grit, determination, calm again, disciplined, a can-do attitude, consistency, self-motivated, determined, but also understands limits,
Nice.
trust, known experience, able to stay calm when the shit hits the fan and doesn't freeze,
That's
calm,
good. Yeah,
calm, educated, confident, aggressive, knowledgeable, calm, cool and calm, aggressive, self-limitations, calm, level-headed, ability to know their crew and their capabilities, willing to take chances that's worth it, not afraid to do what's right, someone squared away and knows what is going on and aware of the situation around them. My
yeah,
regular group, we train and work efficient, cool head, but hardworking, disciplined, people who have a clear understanding of their position. That's pretty much it.
perfect. Yeah. So we've done this exercise a lot. Like I said, Dan's done it in the past. We've done it a lot with a lot of different groups from all over the country. And by and large, we get almost verbatim the exact same answers every single time. And the question is if this is what we strive to be, and we want the person we want to work with, and we personally strive to be, what are some of the challenges? If that's our best self, right? If that's the best we're going to be, what are some of the challenges that we have to being our best selves, right? Some obstacles to this. So we're going to kind of talk about this as we kind of go on here a little bit. All right, so we're going to do a little bit of geometry lesson here. For anybody from that remembers their high school geometry class, a square can be a rectangle, right? But a rectangle can't be a square. I know this sounds a little bit weird, but just kind of bear with me for a moment. So the question that I'm posing here is, can you have an understanding of human performance and not leadership? I would largely say yes. I think somebody can have reasonable understanding of human performance, but not necessarily have a good grasp or capability set of being a leader. Now, on the flip side of it, can you have an understanding of leadership but not human performance? That is a hard no. There's really you cannot be an effective leader if you don't understand how human performance and the obstacles to human performance and some of the physiological reactions that we have that are just natural to us and how this all plays together. So having that understanding of human performance is imperative if you want to really develop yourselves as leaders. Um, Anybody in here know who this gentleman here is? All right, so John Boyd's his name. And what's that?
One guy did know.
Okay, yeah. So John Boyd was he was an Air Force fighter pilot, test pilot. He was very accomplished in the Air Force. And then became a very he effectively after he got out of the military, very much became a thinker. And so he has this quote that you got to challenge all assumptions. And if you don't, what is doctrine on one day, day one rather, becomes dogma forever after. And that's really sort of the basis of what we are kind of pushing for and representing. We want people to challenge the assumptions. We want people to take what it is now and question why. Like frame everything with a why. And it kind of is the ability to combat the old mantra of like, well, we've always done it that way. So like, well, why have we always done it that way? And figure out what it is. One of the things, particularly when I talk to younger guys coming on the job, there's the old saying in fire service, right? You have two ears, one mouth, listen twice as much as you speak. And I kind of disagree with that because I think it's very important, particularly with younger people coming on the job and the fact that they have less and less opportunities to go to the fires. I'd venture there's nobody that's on this group right now that goes to as many fires as they'd really like to. I know for sure as hell I don't. But the challenge is incorporating these younger people who are coming onto the job and figuring out how to encourage them and make them better. If we just tell them like rote memory, well, you have to do A, B, C, and D, and they have no idea why, that inhibits their ability to be better down the road. That just it basically it stunts their growth, right? So what John Boyd did, like I said, he was an Air Force pilot, mind you, but he revolutionized the way that the Marine Corps fights a ground war, which is really an interesting thing because when I was reading his book and learning about him, I'm like, well, how could a guy who was in the Air Force and flew planes revolutionize the way the Marine Corps fights on the ground? And the reason being was because he was a thinker, and he came up with a lot of theories and ideas, and he reapplied them to the way that he kind of looked at the Marine Corps and saw some challenges in the way they did things and was able to exploit them. And what he essentially was part of creating was called maneuver warfare, which is essentially that, where you see a weakness and an opportunity, and you exploit that weakness and opportunity and make things better. I'm sure a lot of us have heard of the OODA loop. He was the creator of that, and that's multi-hour discussion all to itself. But the point is, I just wanted to kind of bring this up and the notion of challenging assumptions. If you're ever curious about John Boyd, he's got a great book written by, I believe the first name is John Coram, and the book is simply called Boyd. It's a very, very good book. So if you've been in the fire service for the last 10 years, 15 years, I'm sure you've seen all the stuff that NIST and UL is doing, and they're doing some great work. And they're teaching us a lot about the science of fire, fire behavior, how buildings react when they're on fire. And they've done an exceptional job at that, right? And now also, if you've been around the fire service for any period of time, I'm sure you've probably been exposed to Vincent Dunn and his book, Collapse of Burning Buildings. All of these things have made us better at what we do. We've made us better professionally, made it better like how we fight fires. But the two things, particularly like what the NIST and UL guys don't because of the nature of how they do business, and because they are scientists, they don't really have the ability to interject the human element into what their practice, what they work on, what they're researching. So it's very important that for us as the consumers of this information to take their information and apply that into the real world, right? We don't exist in a laboratory setting when we go to work, when we go to a fire. A lot of what's happening right now is they're taking industrial, not necessarily NIST and UL, but just it seems like the American Fire Service for some reason is adopting a lot of like industrial hygiene type viewpoints on things and trying to apply that in a world that's a very open system, right? If an industrial hygiene type system is like making microchips, it's a very perfect, everything's perfect every single time, and there's never any deviation. There's loads of deviation in our world. And so we need to as consumers, take this information and then overlay this us, right? A lot of times we're one of the largest variables on the fire ground, and overlay that and have a better understanding on how it all comes together. So if you really think about a fire ground, right? What are the main system components? The weather and the winds, that's going to impact the fire. The fuel load and type, obviously. I mean, if you look at this picture right here, it looks like there's a tire factory on fire in the basement of this private house. The building construction is greatly going to affect what the outcome of the fire is, right? Or the fire department resources. I know we have a pretty wide audience here. So some of us are probably coming from pretty resource strapped organizations where you're responding with probably less people on the rig than you'd really, really like to. Then Dan and I are coming from probably one of the more resource-rich fire departments in the country. So it's a very different approach. And in both of them, the fire department resources can help and hinder at a time. And then when you really want to take what's the other part of this that's just not really being considered, and it is that human factor. So here is, I believe this will be our last thought exercise. All right. So same thing. We're going to do this the same way we just did it previously. And I'm going to ask Dan to kind of just chat them out or yell them out when we get them, right? So there's two categories to this. There's going to be the operational and environmental obstacles that prevent us from being optimal performers. And then there's going to be the internal which is the human dimension, those obstacles that are preventing us from being optimal performers. So if you could throw into the chat a couple, one or two things you think that are operational environmental obstacles, and then also internal obstacles.
So an example, operational environmental might be like the weather or something like that, or do you want more specific than that?
Yeah, that's no, pretty
Okay.
broad. You don't need to go crazy specific.
All right. So internal would be adrenaline, op
Okay.
operational communications, wind, hoarding, fortification, obviously operational. Stress would be internal.
Yep.
Lack of experience,
Okay. We could consider that like novelty, right? Novel new situations.
water supply, secured entry, obviously operational.
Yep. A lot of dynamic kind of fire ground conditions like
Yep.
that. Not necessarily getting what you're hoping for.
Clutter, your own physical condition,
Yeah. Physical fitness.
self-confidence, lack of experience, power
Yep.
lines, lack of manpower. All right. Someone put
Yeah.
intoxication. I guess that could be one too.
That could be one. Hopefully we're not dealing with that too often. At least not
Uh,
at work.
fire conditions, operational staffing, training, a lot of experience, attitude, knowledge. So a lot of the same and
Okay.
true ones.
All right. All right. Yeah, great. That's pretty good. So what we're gonna go here, these are some of this is a list we've kind of populated. And I'm gonna tell you where we got this list from in a moment. So going through this a little bit, right? We have operational environmental resources, limited or too many. Like I just said, sometimes you're gonna be better off with fewer resources, because a lot of times if you taking that human element, if you add a lot more of us, that just overcomplicates things. Weather is certainly, I mean, right here in New York, it's been about 25 degrees all day. It's absolutely frigid outside. And that's going to certainly play into our how we operate in the fire ground. Look at what's going on out west in California right now. Weather is dictating everything that's happening. Friction and complexity, right? Fire ground, like I just said, is a very complex environment. The friction, if you think of the term friction, is really it's the force that makes the apparently easy so difficult, right? So simple things like forcing a door, in theory, can be very, very easy, but between friction and complexity, it gets incredibly simple and or incredibly challenging and sometimes overwhelming, right? Geography certainly plays into it, but then kind of where we're talking now, obviously, I've been hyping on the human dimension, right? Uncertainty and ambiguity is going to be a huge obstacle to human performance. Biologically, physiologically, we want to have answers, right? Our brain wants answers. And when we don't have those answers, it makes it increases the friction on the fire ground. It makes everything that much more challenging. Same thing with novelty, right? Excuse me. How many times have you gone to something where you've never seen it before and it causes you to kind of drop back and reassess what's happening? But then that also elicits a physiological response within you that really ups your stress. We're going to talk about the physiological aspect of this in a little bit. We're going to get to that. Time pressure. I think safe to say every single one of us has felt time pressure in the fire ground, in some fashion or another. And that's going to look very different when maybe you're just a line fireman, right? And you're out there. Your vision of time pressure is going to be very different than the chief out front, and vice versa. So it's very important for us to have that understanding that the other people on the fire ground aren't looking at it for the same lens, and we're all going to have a very different reaction to it. Physical, emotional, mental, and moral forces. A couple of those are pretty self-explanatory. We're going to get to the moral aspect of this in a bit. Clash of two opposing wills, we'll also address momentarily. We don't often have a clash of two opposing wills on the fire. Sometimes we do, human wills at least. But one that's pretty easy to demonstrate is like if you're on the hose line on the inside And you're like, yeah, chief, we're all set. We got it. We're making good progress. And the chief's like, nope, nope, you're not. It's time to go. That sometimes is a little bit of a give and take. And then definitely opposing wills. Like you want to stay on the inside and keep doing what you're doing. The chief's like, no, it's time to go out. That could be, that could definitely add a huge obstacle to the your optimal performance. Risk, risk and fear of failure and a catastrophic outcome. That could get overlaid in a multitude of different ways. But certainly we've all had that feeling of risk and fear of failure. And now again, so now put yourself in a position as where you're a very senior firefighter and you have a brand new firefighter right next to you. They could be in the like prime fitness of the life. They're ready to go. They just graduated the fire academy. They got all these skills. They're ready to employ and put to work. And they're absolutely terrified of that risk of fear and failure. That risk of fear and failure could be internally, individually to them, but also the risk and fear of they're going to fail the company, fail the people they're with. Um, that again, that's very individualistic, but all things that add to obstacles on the fire ground. So I want to talk about some emerging obstacles to human performance. On the top left, I know we've had a pretty severe issue with lithium-ion battery fires in the city, and that's certainly impacting our operations. I know it's starting to show up everywhere. On the top right? So we have protests and civil unrest, or kind of like a new thing that most of us have really never had to deal with in recent memory. Back in 2020, the summer of 2020, we had some civil unrest in the city here, and at that point in time, there was nobody left on the New York City Fire Department that was around to see the civil unrest of the 60s and 70s. They'd all been retired. So that was a novel event that the New York City Fire Department had to navigate without any institutional knowledge, really. And that was kind of a unique event, really. In the bottom left, I put this delivery drone, right? It's just a Walmart delivery drone. Something that we're not really thinking about that certainly could be impacting us, right? How are drones going to impact our lives, right? If they can deliver a bag of knickknacks or whatever from Walmart, then you could also use that same drone to deliver something that's a little bit more lethal, that's meant to disrupt and meant to cause problems and harm and pain and suffering. And then now, who's going to be responding to this situation when that time comes? It's going to be us. Something else that is really we haven't had to deal with so much, but as a fire service, but I think it's coming, is the effects of AI. And then overlay that with the drones and how is this stuff going to really begin to impact us? I'm sure you guys could all think of dozens and dozens of other potential obstacles to human performance, but these are just some of the ones that came to the top of my head. Looking at that upper right photograph, that protest, and this isn't a political conversation, right, left, center, whatever it may be. I could care less. But the point being here, we mentioned on the previous slide, a clash of two opposing wills. If you're responding to a report of a fire and you have people closing down a main thoroughfare because of whatever it is that they happen to believe in and at that moment in time, you're going to have to navigate an actual very legitimate clash of two opposing wills. How are you going to try to disperse this crowd when they think that whatever they're doing is the absolute most important thing at that moment in time? But now you're getting reports of multiple calls and people trapped, and you know that you have a place to be. There is no right or wrong answer that I'm going to come out with here, but it's one of these things that I just strongly encourage you to think about, and think about the things. There's so many different things. Let me rephrase. Right. When we all signed on to the fire department, career, volunteer, whatever it may be, none of us had the opportunity to pick the decade or the location necessarily that we wanted to do what we do. Right. I mean, I can guarantee I would not have picked getting on the job in 2006 if I could do it all over again. If I had a time machine, I'd be going back a few decades, where pretty much all they had to do was worry about going to fires. And we now have to worry about a million other things that were not necessarily relevant years ago. Sure, we get to go to fires occasionally, but I mean, as we all know, that is a very small percentage of our world. Um, Technical rescue issues have skyrocketed. Um, Swift water places are flooding that had never flooded previously. Things like the civil unrest. That Home Depot truck in the middle right there is representative of a lunatic who rented that and then on Halloween in Manhattan ran that up the West Side Highway by walking path and plowed over a bunch of kids trick-or-treating. And the first fire companies that responded to that received that run as a pedestrian struck. And they arrived to find multiple people down and a full-blown gunfight going on with the police. This is our operational environment now. This is not fallacy. This isn't this is something that could occur anywhere, as unfortunately as we've seen, anywhere in the United States. This is not isolated to the urban areas. It's not isolated to New York City. The civil unrest on the bottom right there, like again, the summer of 2020 was a very strange summer in New York City. So moving forward here, I'm sure many of you probably recognize what this is a photograph of. And when I saw it, I saw it a week and a half ago on the CBS Sunday Morning Show, and they showed this video. I must have watched it 3 times. I had to stop, and I told my wife like she thought I was crazy because I kept rewinding it. What this is a picture of is New Orleans police officers doing CPR on the psychopath who drove down Bourbon Street, murdered 14 people, had a gunfight with the police, shot 2 of them, and then injured dozens of others, right? But what's so impressive about this photograph is right after the New Orleans Police Department neutralized this individual, they immediately began life-saving care. We sit around the kitchen table in the firehouse. A lot of times we want to be the judge and jury, and we don't have that opportunity. We don't have that luxury when we're out on the street. We have a moral obligation to take care of people and to help people, saving life and property. And this was one of the single greatest photographs. Well, there was a video, a screenshot of a video, but it was one of the single greatest moments that I've seen, like of just that moral imperative, like doing what is the right thing to do, regardless of how. That's not what these people wanted to do to this individual, I'm sure, but what they did was an amazing thing. And especially after everything that happened in the preceding, probably less than 3, 4 minutes at that point in time. But when you really think about the moral imperative, this is something that goes well beyond a horrific event like this. It could be we all have a moral imperative in just every day we walk around the firehouse in terms of how we hold ourselves, how we handle ourselves, how we work with the people we work with, whether we're a firefighter and we're working with our other firefighters, or whether we're a company officer or chief officer. There's all of it all plays into it. And but this was a very powerful picture for me. Does anybody? Oh, I can't really get a whole lot of response here. All right, so the Citizen app, it's a phone app, and it's a crowdsourcing app. So you get a notification if you happen to be near an incident, and you can go on there and then just live stream the incident on your phone, and then people all over the world and anybody who has the app can then watch what's going on. This is a really new thing. We have it in New York City. It's in a lot of places around the country. And we've discussed this a lot amongst us, right, at LUF, and we've really kind of had the epiphany that it's a double-edged sword. There's a lot of good things that can come from it, but there's a lot of challenging things that come from it. Dan and I both know from having worked in Midtown Manhattan that as soon as the apparatus doors go up, the only thing that you see outside is everybody taking a picture or video in that big red shiny billboard that's driving down the street. There's nothing that's not on camera anymore. And if you go back into yesteryear, right, that the firemen of the 70s were never playing on primetime TV. And now we're all effectively playing on primetime TV. And the reason I bring this up is now I want you to question what is the response that you get to it, right? So I'm going to show this video here. This is a fire. This fire occurred in Chicago this morning. And this is the thing. So I'm sitting in my apartment in Brooklyn watching this fire in Chicago. And then I see these poor guys struggling with this ladder, right, to get it out of the ladder bay. I know I've done that dozens of times, fighting with it. It's caught on God knows what gets caught up on in there. But so now there's this guy in Brooklyn just sitting here watching these poor guys struggling with this. Now, how do you want, like, now imagine that's you. And now all your buddies are like, oh, look at so and so messing around. So now, again, when you have that fear of failure, that physiological response, how are you going to handle that? How are you going to feel about that? And it's a challenging thing to overcome. When you're making a mistake, or not even making a mistake, these guys aren't making a mistake, but when you're having something, when there's that added friction to an event, and then all of a sudden you see somebody coming up with a camera, like how are you going to react to that? It's a challenging thing to navigate. A lot of what we're going to talk about here, we're not necessarily providing answers. We're providing information where we hope that it encourages some form of thought. And you kind of go back and chew it up a little bit and think about it and like how different things have impacted you, could potentially impact you, what this really means for you professionally. I don't know if anybody saw this picture from California the other day. It's a pretty powerful picture. Everything is absolutely destroyed, with the exception of this one blue VW van that somehow survived. If you guys been paying attention to the news, you've seen little things like this happening all over the place out there, where one house in a whole neighborhood is unscathed, and the rest of the neighborhood looks like this. Um, and the point that I'm going with here is we very rarely, as a fire service, take into account what like luck and chance really play into our world. If you read line of duty death reports, whether they be the ones that the city put out or NIOSH or other fire departments around the country, what we do, we strive to explain everything that happens. And there's a lot that we just don't know. And we take the inexplicable and we try to massage the story to make sense because we want to make sense. In our heads, we want to go left to right and make sense of it. Um, Now, the luxury that a lot of people have, the investigators have when they're doing these reports, is they're going from right to left. They're going from the moment the catastrophic moment at the end, and then they're writing a story from right to left to get back to the beginning. And then so when there's little hiccups, little inconsistencies that don't necessarily follow that normal linear path, um, we as a fire service very much strive to find a narrative that fits around that. But a lot of times we don't take into consideration that it's just luck and chance. It's like, well, I went left instead of right or right instead of left. He found the victim and I fell through a hole. Um, it's there's no reason for what happened, good and bad. And something that I think that the fire service very much needs to consider. Um, that there are sometimes just not answers. Now, with that,
Well, and Dan, I think too, I'll just chime in real quick if you don't
yeah,
mind. I mean, I think the other
absolutely.
thing we can't put in these reports is what was going through the person's mind, and that's what we're here for tonight is what was the mental aspect of it, right? Especially if it was a line of duty death, you can't interview the person after and say, what were you thinking when X, Y, or Z happened, and why did you go left instead of right?
Right, exactly. Yeah, we're trying to these reports, as exhaustive as they are, and as much incredible effort it gets poured into this, and emotion and everything. At best, they're a best guess a lot of time about a lot of stuff. To your point, exactly. We don't know. We don't have any idea what the deceased was going through at that moment in time. We can only surmise and try to attempt to make heads or tails of it.
So I haven't seen your PowerPoint yet. We're 45 minutes in. I just want to, I don't know how much you have. I want to make sure we get to a lot of the physiological stuff that we've talked about in the
Yeah, we're going to
past.
start that right
That's
now.
fine.
Yep.
And guy, and I'll just say it because I've been through this class before, and there is a lot of stuff like this at the beginning. You're like, I thought it like, why are we talking about this? Why is this up here? Why are we doing this exercise? And the couple of things you said, it does that I want to, just reiterate. It really does tie in together. And this is what I would classify as an awareness type thing, where you're not going to come out with the operations or the technical aspect of how to deal with it, but you're going to come out with the awareness of what happens, why it happens, and, how to identify that it's happening, because that's the first step to being able to, kind of combat it. And just like a lot of the other seminars that we do, we're just scratching the surface on some of these topics. So, sorry to interrupt. Continue
No,
on.
no, that's perfect. Yeah, one of the things like I said, there's not a lot of answers here. There's a
Mhm.
lot of research and questions that we generate, and it's ultimately for you all to kind of really digest. And I mean, this is years and years and years worth of discussions and research and thoughts, and that really kind of comes to this. And like Dan said, this is barely scratching the surface.
And when you get to some of these things, I think the biggest thing that guys that are watching can take out of it is being able to identify when these things are happening on the fire ground and being able to say, hey, that's happening. He must be under some undue stress. Let me be aware of that. It's not like we have a solution for it, which was
No,
which was frustrating the first time I took it. Like, hey, you're telling me all this stuff, but then you're not telling me how to solve it.
yeah, it's so individualistic.
So,
I mean, there's definitely some tricks and things like that you
right.
can kind of use to temper this stuff. But like what we're going to get into right now is this is human nature. There's nothing you can do to program this out of you. Um, a lot of this goes back to quite literally ancient man running away from a saber-toothed tiger. Like it's all the same stuff. Everything we feel now, they felt then, and it's all they just didn't have an understanding of it then near quite near as what we do now. So this chart on the right-hand side, the Yerkes-Dodson human performance curve, this was created over 100 years ago by Yerkes and Dodson. Um, and it's a very, very simple way to kind of look at what we're going to kind of discuss here. So if you look at the bottom axis, stress and performance on the vertical axis. So stress can be good and bad. And trying to explain this to you. On the left side right here, if you look at that stress, so that's pretty much where we're at right now. We're all on the left side of the curve. We're all very chill. We're probably watching this at a nice climate controlled place. A couple of us might have a beverage or two. We're very chill. Hopefully you're not bored, but you're very calm, right? And then as that stress goes up, you're going to get to a point where you're kind of hitting that what we call like the sweet spot of the curve, where your performance level increases and improves, and you're feeling energized and focused and starting. It's that kind of adrenaline thing. Like we've all had that where like you get that shot of adrenaline and you can do things you couldn't do before because it's that positive stress. Now where this tends to go negative for us is when we hit what we call the backside of the curve. When you hit the backside of the curve, that's when you're going to get that stress goes a little bit too high and it starts to inhibit performance. And that's because that's the emotional stress, right? We're talking about. And we're going to get to the difference between physical and emotional stress in a second. But emotional stress affects the body very, very differently than physical stress. If we all got up right now and went and ran a half mile and came back, we'd all have elevated heart rates. But by and large, we would not have a decline of our physical skills and mental cognitive skills. But now, conversely, if you ran a half mile and there was a dude behind you chasing you with a gun, you're going to have a huge increase in hormones and different like stress chemicals that get dumped into your body that are actually going to lead to a negative. It's that fight or flight syndrome where your body starts to focus on survival rather than performance. So when it focuses more on survival rather than performance, you actually end up losing certain dexterities. So if you look at the left column on that slide right here, some of the things we can feel or see, right, is like your vision and hearing and speech all change, smell, fine motor skills can tend to suffer. Complex motor skills can very much suffer. And what this is the reason we bring this stuff up is A, it happens to every single one of us, and B, is what we want to increase here is the awareness of it. And then we can go into, like I said, there's some skills that you have that you can employ to try to what we call bring yourself off the backside of the curve. Um, so think about like time distortion and spatial distortion. We've all gone to a fire and operated for 10 minutes, felt like it was an hour. Conversely, operated for an hour, thought it was about 10 minutes. And it's going to be very different. Again, if you look at like the guys who are inside doing the search and stretching the hose lines, they might be in there for 10 minutes or an hour and think they're in there for 10 minutes. The chief out front might think that that first 10 minutes feels like an hour. And then again, it's because of our own individual, what we've been exposed to, what we've seen in our careers, experiences that we've had, coupled with our physical and biological preparations. There's a lot of different things. But some of the things I don't want to hit on here too is memory fallibility. The higher your emotional stress goes, the much more fallible your memory is. So again, using those line of duty death investigations as an example, we take all this information from guys who are operating, and then all of a sudden we're trying to make heads and tails of it. But this is some of the most emotional stress they probably ever experienced in their entire life, the people that were closest to it. So it's understandable and reasonable that there's going to be a lot of memory fallibility. If Dan and I went to the same fire and there was no catastrophic outcome, him and I are going to have very different memories of the same fire, even if we were working side by side, just because of how we were physiologically being impacted, different things that have happened to us in the past, different fires we've been to. When you get into these higher stress situations, you can actually, your brain actually very, very naturally will go back and pick items from other fires that you were at. And it's now when you're trying to recollect the fire I was at yesterday, it's picking up something out about a fire I was at 7, 8 months ago, and putting it in there. It's a really unique issue. But just things that need to be brought to our consciousness here. So this is just a different way of looking at that last slide a little bit. I'm going to ask that you largely ignore the beats per minute on the left-hand side because it's not totally accurate. These numbers are for emotional stress. If you get an elevated heart rate due to emotional stress, these numbers are really kind of where that's relevant. But the problem is, in our world, we have concurrent stressors going on. We have physical stress and we have emotional stress. So trying to pair them apart is almost impossible in our world. What the reason we put this up here though is so you kind of have like this ballpark idea of what is happening on that scale as we go off the backside of the curve. So again, we're sitting down in the green right now, very much normal resting heart rate, very comfortable, no threats. As it goes up, some of your fine motor skills begin to deteriorate a little bit. Moving forward, auditory exclusion, loss of near vision, you can consider that tunnel vision. And then let's go to this next slide here because it kind of explains it a little bit better. So when we have that auditory exclusion, right? A lot of times we'll go to the fire ground and be like, "Oh man, why didn't you hear that? Why aren't you listening?" And we used to maybe like blame it on somebody just flat out not paying attention. But what we're realizing more and more is that it's actually a physiological response. We conducted a study in Harlem in the 12th Battalion, in conjunction with Columbia University, and it was a memory recall study, and we found out that throughout the course, what we did, we have the luxury of getting our radio recordings, the fireground radio transmissions, and we would go as soon as the guys came out of the fire. Basically, they were handed a piece of paper. It's like write down, well, not as soon as you got back to the firehouse, handed a piece of paper. It's like, all right, write down all the transmissions that you can remember from that fire, all the radio transmissions. Typically, there'd be between like on an average fire between 150 to 300 radio transmissions over the radio, which seems like a lot, but in reality, I guess it's not that much. But we were finding recall rates of between 5 and 10%, which is very telling. And that goes a lot to the auditory exclusion. Another thing that we found out was that the majority of the people that were partaking in this were only remembering things that were relevant to them. So if you're working in the engine company, they were only like, it was very much like engine company relevant topics. We have positive water. We have water on the fire. Conversely, if you're in the truck, it's like, oh yeah, the primary surges are negative. We're like, if I have a fire extension on the floor above, like just different things that were, but very self-relevant. So this is a list right here of a lot of things. Intrusive thoughts is an interesting one. I'm sure we've all been in some situations that are a little bit more on the higher on the emotional stress level, where we're getting these intrusive thoughts, and it doesn't make sense why these things are popping into your head right now. But again, the brain works in mysterious ways, and we can't explain all of it. And it's been very telling in terms of how when we're operating at some of these events, we're physiologically responding. So the next clip I have here is a little video that I want to use to demonstrate the difference between emotional and physical stress. I hope the sound works, and Dan, if the sound doesn't work, just give me a heads up. But
All right.
what this video is a Red Bull triathlete named Kirsten Sweetland. She's in absolute peak physical conditioning, and they have a human performance lab at Red Bull, and they got this box and filled it with snakes, and they had these elite level athletes crawl through it all while monitoring their heart rates, and the uh, the outcome was pretty spectacular. So I'm gonna play it real quick.
I don't hear volume.
It's
Oh,
not
there. Yeah, no, we're good.
actually a tool, it's a trigger. It brings you up, and in many cases, you need to be brought up to get ready to do what it is you're about to do.
I knew I was scared of snakes, but I've never actually put myself in a position where I had to get near them. I'm kind of glad that I couldn't see. I put my hand right on the snake fairly early on, and that's where I really lost it. Like at first, I was doing my deep breaths, and I almost didn't really sink in what I was doing. Apparently, I kind of charged. Everyone else was taking their time, and I just wanted to get through there. My heart rate went from sitting down beforehand at 37 to 170 while I was just crawling in there. Learning to face that kind of primal fear and having the experience of feeling probably the most fear I've felt and overcoming it, and how amazing that feels afterwards just gives us the confidence to do that again and again.
So Kirsten Sweetland went from a resting heart rate of 37 and then topped out in the 170s. And she wasn't running, biking, swimming. She was crawling through this snake cage, which would drive me crazy. But it's a remarkable thing. That is purely emotional stress. And here's a demonstration on how one of our people dealt with some emotional stress. So we want to talk about some of the data that we collect. We wear a lot of the members of LUF wear this, like a device that looks like this, some type of biometric device. This particular one is called Whoop. There's Garmin's, Apple Watches to an extent do it, but a lot of us track our biometrics, and for the purpose of understanding, again, physiologically what's happening to us when we have the opportunity to go to fires and emergencies. So the two types of data that we're looking to pull out of here are psychological stress and physiological stress. What Kirsten Sweetland just went through in that snake cage was psychological stress. So if you look at this picture to the graphic on the right, this is one of our members who was out for a run. Nice early morning, 6:51 in the morning to 8:04, nice long run. And he's kind of cruising along. You can look at his heart rate there. And then you see where it dips down. It's where he stopped to take a breather, perhaps relieve himself behind the tree. And then he gets back up and he gets back on his way. And all of a sudden you see that spike right there. That's when he went face to face with a bear in the woods where he was running. So that right there is an ability, a very, very clear ability for us to pull out and tease out what a physiological strain is versus a psychological strain. So his running, very physiological, very like he would be on the very much on the left side of the curve from from an emotional standpoint while he's running, but then he sees that bear and then he goes right to the backside of the curve for a couple of minutes right there. And then you can see where he takes another quick break, probably to catch his breath after the bear left, and then he goes on his way, and then all's well with the world. But this is one of our big challenges is as we do this data collection, and LUF right now, we have well north of 2,000 data sets from guys who were in obviously New York City, Baltimore City, Camden, New Jersey, Cherry Hill, New Jersey, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Contra Costa County, California has been a great partner with us. And we've been able to gather this immense data set, and we can create baselines for people and see how they operate at certain types of incidents. And then when there's an outlier incident, we can have the ability then to sort of tease out the psychological versus physiological reactions that they have. So, question here is, how much is too much? The graphic all the way on the left is Patrick Mahomes. He wears a Whoop data from playing in the Super Bowl. The graphic second from the left that has where it says operations tactical 3 times over is from one of our members who is works in a rescue company in Baltimore. And on this particular night, well, at the time he worked in a rescue company, but on this particular night, they had a pretty career night where they had the opportunity to go to 4 fires and operate at 4 fires of consequence in about a 12-hour period. And as you're going through it, he describes himself how his personal operations, how he fatigued and at towards the end of it, he was dealing with that fine motor skills were lost, complex motor skills were lost. And it's just that grinding down of the body. And again, so we consider like not all that's a pretty banner night, like I said, going to 4 fires in a night. But the reason we're bringing this up is we want to understand physiologically what's happening to us. That one in the middle where it says near maximal strain was one of our members who was a ladder company chauffeur at a truck in Harlem, and they did 27 runs in 24 hours. No fires, nothing of any major consequence, but he had a near maximal strain. And again, so just that notion of what's happening to us physiologically when we go to work. The one all the way on the right is an individual waking up from a period of pretty deep rest, and how fast their heart rates goes from mid 60s to 150 beats a minute almost instantly. So when we ask the question, how much is too much, it's something that we as a fire service need to take into consideration in terms of really how we do business. And this is part of a much, much, much longer conversation. And again, we're really just scratching the surface. And if anybody's interested in discussing this stuff or anything like that, by all means, I'd love to hear from you. So we'll have the contact information at the end. Right. So what about heat and humidity? We want to know like how that plays into what we do. In New York City, we have a long history that whenever not when it used to snow, we had a long history of we'd consistently add extra people onto our staffing to facilitate stretching hose lines and digging out buried hydrants, things like that. But we've never really added people on those days when we get that long heat wave in the middle of July and August. So there's two cart rate graphics here. The one on the left is a battalion chief operating as the chief on the inside of the building. So we have the way we operate here, we have the incident commander on the outside, and we have another battalion chief who responds on the inside and monitors what's going on in the inside. The graphic on the left is the chief who was the all hands chief at this fire shown here, and operated for about an hour and a half. On the middle slide right there is biometric output data from one of our other members from the very same day. And he's an absolute psychopath. And on a 100-degree day, went for a 10-mile run at Central Park because that's what he does. But what was really, really interesting here was, so about similar times, he mind you, he was also a professional triathlete. The guy is in unbelievable shape. But both of them had durations of about an hour and a half, and largely had very similar curvature of their energy output, right? So the one on the left was a chief. He wasn't pulling sealants, he wasn't stretching hose lines, he wasn't at the tip of the spear, if you will. But just him bouncing around that building on a 100-degree day for an hour and a half, he had effectively very similar output to going on a 10-mile run in that same weather. So again, when we talk about like how much is too much or how the outside environment is impacting us, all of this plays into it. And then you got to imagine at the end of that, like where are you at physiologically and mentally? You got to be pretty well smoked at that point in time. So we're going to kind of transition into a little bit of like a leadership aspect of the program here. Just some things that I put together. This thing wants to come. There we go. So decision making under stress, right? It's a very challenging thing to do, and a lot of times we don't have all the information that we really want to have. As we discussed before, right? We operate in a very ambiguous environment. We have a lot of unknowns. In a lot of situations, it's a very novel environment, which absolutely hinders our decision-making abilities. And Patton was known to say, a good plan violently executed now is better than a perfect plan next week. And that's exactly the world we live in. Sometimes we're making very, very important decisions that have the direct impact on the outcome that we have to make with very, very imperfect information and under very legit time issues. So wanted to ask, like, how is leadership developed? In my experience, I would say leadership is largely developed from observation, experience, and emulation. A lot of the way I do business now is as a result of having the luxury and opportunity to have been exposed to good officers, good firefighters, good chiefs throughout my career. And I've been able to kind of take that observation and largely emulate it, and then overlay that with my own personal experiences that I've had throughout my life and my career. So kind of hitting a couple of things here. What I did, I broke this down into some like just headings and categories of things that I think are important in terms of how we handle ourselves. And one of the things is like just always endeavor to be a good person and just doing the right thing. So before, when I was talking about having that moral imperative, so there's the moral imperative to act on the fire ground and the emergency scene, but there's also the moral imperative that when you're in a firehouse, we have the responsibility as leaders, whether it be formal leaders or informal leaders, we have to have the responsibility to be a good person, set the example, maintain that character. It's the only way you're ever going to earn the respect and trust of others. And then conversely, like you these aren't things you can give away. You absolutely have to earn them. I put APE down at the bottom is really the only three things that we have any real control over when we come to work, right? We don't have control over sometimes, most of the time, who we work with, what emergencies we're going to respond to. There's very little we have control over, but what we do have control over is our attitude, our preparation, and our effort. And if you can always endeavor to be a good person, right? Endeavor to have a positive attitude, and endeavor to get that preparation going. We're never, very rarely are we going to be 100% the best version of ourselves all the time. But again, it's that ape. You want to have just maintain that ape attitude, preparation, and effort. So relationships too. I think as a fire service, we largely undervalue rather the importance of relationships. The reason I put the bowl right there in that second bullet was one of my first nights in the firehouse. The engine captain in the fire, I was assigned to the ladder company, but the engine captain, he had a very interesting way of doing business. And then so me thinking I was being the good young new firefighter, as soon as I was done eating, I got up, I ran over to the sink to start doing dishes and getting everything cleaned up. And he rockets a bowl across the kitchen, a metal bowl across the kitchen of my head. Thankfully, it missed. And I certainly am not advocating that anybody does this today. It was questionable if he could get away with it then. But he told me to sit the hell down. And he's like, look, here's how we do things here. He's like, we finish eating and then we sit around and we talk. We just talk. TV gets muted and we talk. We learn about each other. We learn about our families and like what makes each other tick. And it's thankfully at that time it was a lot. It was before the cell phones, but it's like we put the cell phone down. Now I go to places and I just see people just scrolling at the end of the meal. There'll be 10 people sitting at a table and 10 people on their phone. And it really, um, it's putting a strain on the relationships. And it's one of those things that I think it's a huge challenge that we need to overcome, to a point where we need to make a very deliberate point to ensure that we create these relationships.
Not to insert anything, but I think some people don't even have 10 people on their shift here. So,
Well, yeah, that's probably not even the fire department. But whoever it is, it's whether it's 3 or 2 or 10 or whatever. It's an important thing to build these relationships and get to know each other. And like when I say get to know, I mean like really know, not just like, oh, like what's your favorite beer? It's like, I mean, really get to know these people. And then like love the one you're with. Sometimes we might get assigned to a company or a shift that's not necessarily exactly where we want to be, but that's where you're at now. So love the one you're with. Make it as good as it's going to be. And that's largely falls back on your ape, right? That's your attitude. If you go in there with a bad attitude, you're not going to be the leader that you should be. And again, when I use the term leader, it doesn't matter. I don't care if you have a day in the firehouse or you've got 35 years in the firehouse. You can be a leader at any rank. So again, that unit cohesion, how do you cultivate that unit cohesion? We've got to reinforce and refine the basics. We as a fire service, we like shiny things. Like we like to chase gadgets. We like to chase hacks. But at the end of the day, if we focus on the fundamentals and the basics, which we're going to talk about in a moment or two, that's really the crux of it, right? Keeping your team informed. I know you guys can read all the bullets, so I'm not going to go through each one. But like, and keeping your team informed, particularly coming from a standpoint of a company officer, you're the conduit from the department level to the firefighters. Like you're the conduit that needs to relay that information, enforce the things that need to be enforced, empower the people that need to be empowered. But you need to be as transparent as possible and keeping them informed and knowing what's going on. Information really is everything. And if you can do that, that's just going to kind of increase that unit cohesiveness. So 246 was where the captain that rocketed that bullet in my head was from. And again, he got on in the early 82, I think he got on, and worked at some really hard hitting places and had a very maniacal way of doing things. But the way he did things was incredible. So he always, without fail, maintained a high standard, a high personal standard, a high professional standard. And I love this last line. It's like, conduct yourself so your personal habits are not open to criticism, right? We all know that individual in the firehouse that just does something that like they can't help but be criticized for whatever reason, whatever dumb thing they're doing. But it's one of those things. If you're a leader at any level, just conduct yourself, hold yourself high, chest out, be proud. And we're all going to fail. We're all going to screw up. We're all going to make mistakes. But these are all the ways you overcome all those physiological challenges that we talked about before. So we worked with a gentleman named Preston Klein. He's from the University of Pennsylvania. He's strictly an academic. He's been a good partner to LUF and definitely helped us out with a lot of things. He went he had the opportunity to go witness some SEALs, Navy SEALs doing training. And he was all pumped up. He's like, this is great. This is my opportunity finally to go see how the best of the best get trained and who trains the best of the best. So they go to this kill house here and there's a catwalk around it. So he's up top, he's watching it, he's all pumped up. He's like, this is it. This is the holy grail of how we train elite level operators. And so they run through their evolution, and at the end of it, they kind of circle up. They're like, "All right, cool." Like, and he's getting ready for like the big reveal on how this all happens. And the lead instructor looks at him. He's like, "You suck less." It's like, now think about that. Like, what does that is that developing anybody? They probably know they sucked at that evolution, right? but saying suck less is not going to help anybody. So us as company officers, chiefs, firefighters, when we're drilling and training, we need to, this goes back to what I said before about challenging assumptions, asking the why, understanding the why. And like, all right, well, why did I suck? Why didn't this go well? What happened here? What was the interpersonal? What were the was there any relationship failures between us? Did I not understand what was going on there because I didn't spend enough time talking to you, like just getting to know you a couple weeks ago? It's pretty abstract, and I understand that. But all these things really do connect, at the end of the day. So you don't get to fly the 747 unless you learn to fly in this. The same way, the guy in the top right here was an absolute legend in the South Bronx. I'm sure many of us read the book Report from Engine Company 82. This individual, Jimmy Ginty, he was pretty prevalent in that book. He was a character, and he became one of the absolute, like I said, one of the absolute legends. I have the pure luck of being in the pipe band for the fire department here, and he was our senior guy until he passed away a couple years ago, and he was he was God. Whatever Jimmy said went. There was no discussion. But Jimmy didn't get to where he got on the fire department without starting out at the exact same place that we all start out at. So it's the fundamentals and the basics. Joe Madden here was the manager for the Cubs when they won the World Series, and one of his lines is the relentless execution of the fundamentals. And again, I think I might have mentioned it once before already, but when you think about the executing of the fundamentals, if we plan for 99% of the time to knock it out of the park with the fundamentals and the basics, when we have that 1% of those novel events, there's like a lot of unknowns, ambiguity. That's when we can use that. So our basics and fundamentals. So I always say, like, plan for 99% of the time and adapt and overcome for that last 1%. Because it's only about 1% really that we're just looking at, like, I have no idea what's going on here. So this is one of my favorite slides here. Joe Madden for the Game 7 of the World Series. This is his lineup card, and he always writes these little mnemonics on there to kind of get him through the game and kind of keep him grounded and centered and to be present, right? So up at the top here is DNP, TPT, ETP, and that's do not permit the pleasure of the, excuse me, do not permit the pressure to exceed the pleasure. So when he's in Game 7 of the World Series, it's like, all right, like, you can't let the pressure of the situation exceed where you're at. You're in the World Series. And a lot of times, like, I've been very guilty of it, where even if it's just interpersonal stuff in the firehouse, sometimes I'm letting the pressure of the nonsense exceed the pleasure. I didn't move from Philadelphia to New York City to be miserable. I moved to there to be a fireman and to enjoy what I do. Be present, not perfect. So that goes back to that decision making. You're not going to make the most perfect decisions all the time, and it's very important to be present. Your brain can only be in one place at any given time, and there's three possible places for it to be: the past, the present, and the future. The brain is scientifically incapable of operating in two time zones. So it's really important that we're present, not focusing on the past and not focusing on the future when we're making these decisions and we're in these events, these high stress events. Positive and optimistic. Maintain that positive and optimistic viewpoint, right? It's not out. You can't maintain an outlandish, positive, optimistic viewpoint, but if it's reasonable and grounded in reality, it's that's a very important place to be. Up top center says do simple better, right? DSB. Moving to the right, DNBAFF is do not be a fucking fan. And I like that one because, again, we all love what we do. Otherwise, we wouldn't be on this podcast or this Zoom thing tonight. But it's very, very important, though, that we maintain professionalism at the end of the day. That's really what that is. Don't be a fan. We're all professionals. And then the process. The process is fearless. We got that down in the bottom right. And then the irreverent is a nod to Don Zimmer. And Don Zimmer was a character who was one of Joe Madden's mentors. And he had this line Greg Maddux had this line rather that Don Zimmer made me realize there was a difference between winning and pitching just good enough to lose. Now, so like, when you think about that, the difference between playing to win or pitching just good enough to lose. Like, where are we at as if you think about yourself personally, your organizations, your companies, the American Fire Service as a whole, where are we at right now? Like what that's a lot of discussion to be had right now. Is the American Fire Service, or you individually, or your company, or your department, are you pitching to win, or are you pitching just good enough to lose? That's a pretty introspective question that I kind of look at. Like I'm sure Dan does too, but I kind of look at where I'm at in my career, and I look at where the FDNY is and things like that, and I go back and forth with this a lot. It's a very philosophical question. So, being the Philadelphia native that I am, I had to go with the Phillies here. So, when we discuss the notion of process versus outcome, Ranger Suarez here, he has one job only. It's not to throw strikes, it's not to get outs. His job is to throw the best pitch at the right time possible in the best way he can, right? So, his desired outcome certainly is to throw strikes and get outs. 100%. That's the desired outcome. But the problem is, how do we get there? We have to focus on the path that's required to get to that outcome. And if he's focusing in the future, like I said, we got to be present. So if he's focusing on the future and what's going to happen as soon as that ball crosses home plate, he's not focusing on what he needs to do at that exact moment, which is throwing that ball in the best way possible. And then so it's important to be proficient at the required tasks. So if we're focusing on the steps, the procedures that we have, the process, then the outcome will be what it's going to be. He could throw the ball, he could throw the greatest pitch of his career, and the batter drives a grand slam home. It's just that's just the nature of the luck and the chance of the game. But at that moment in time, he did what he needed to do the best way he could. So that's where like a real kind of quick down and dirty analogy for process versus outcome that I like. We can go to a fire and we could do everything 100% right and fail and have a catastrophic outcome, whether civilian loss of life, one of us. But everybody did everything right. So we did the process right. But sometimes we just don't have a positive outcome. Conversely, we could go and do a lot of things wrong and still have a very positive outcome. And then that's a dangerous position for us, because then we assume that because we did everything wrong and still had a positive outcome, that we didn't do anything wrong. And again, it's a very introspective thing. And I very much encourage people to be introspective and kind of look and challenge the assumptions and then think about why and how we got to where we are in our respective worlds. So I recently became a little bit of a Red Bull fan, or well, not Red Bull, Red Bull in general, but a Formula One fan. And a couple of years ago, and watching particularly the Red Bull team, they've been consistently one of the best teams for the last couple of years. Best drivers, best cars, best pit crews, best pit stops, like pretty remarkable. And I use this as an example because it's like, well, how do you create such an elite team? You can't have the captain walking in and being like, "Well, fellas, we're gonna be the best. We're gonna be great today." That just doesn't work like that. You need to have a collective group buy-in. So when we have that, to create that, though, it's important, I think, for everybody to sit down and discuss, whether it be the formal leaders as well as the informal leaders need to sit together and be like, all right, well, I was a lieutenant ladder 4. Like, what does ladder 4, what do we want this to look like? What do we want this company to be? And now if we have this group buy-in from the junior people to the senior people, from the informal leaders to the formal leaders, and we have this group buy-in, then it's seamless because it's an organic creation. So now at the end of the day, when somebody calls somebody else out, they can't be like, oh, well, just Captain Southrank said this is how it's going to be. It's like, well, no, Captain Southrank didn't say that. Ladder 4 said that. We all said that. We all sat down together and came up with this shared vision of what we want to be. And largely, that's what, like, when you look at a team that performs as well as like as the Red Bull team does, you can definitely tell that's in their world, that's in their lexicon. Similarly, right? I'm sure many of you guys recognize this as the compound where Bin Laden was killed. So when the SEALs were practicing this, they built a mock-up of this in the desert out in the West. And they would do it at nighttime, and during the daytime, they would basically tear it down because it was such a top secret mission. Nobody could know about it. So they made something that they could practice on and drill on overnight, run a couple of evolutions, take it down, and nobody was the wiser. When it came to game time, they go over, and I'm getting ahead of myself. My apologies. When they were practicing this, they came up, they had a plan B, plan C, plan D, and they knew everything in and out. Each person knew the other one's jobs and responsibilities. Everybody knew the jobs and responsibilities of above and below them. So there was no questions that there was a lot of depth in their bench, really, and they had the ability to adapt and overcome, right? Like I said before, when you had that 1% event happen. So what ended up when they went to go execute this mission, that 1% event did happen, and the helicopter crashed in that courtyard on the left. The reason being, when they were practicing in the desert and with their mock-up, they had 10-foot chain link fences around the outside of the compound. When it was game day, they went to go land in there, and the rotor wash, because in the desert with the chain link fences, the rotor wash would just dissipate going out the chain link fence. But then when they got into that, they had these 11-foot concrete walls. The rotor wash went up and then back down inside of the rotor, and they lost lift, which is what caused them to crash. But because when they practiced all this, because they were an elite team, they practiced repetitively ad nauseum. They were hyper focused. They had all the problem solving built into their plan. Like I said, they had a plan B, C, and D. They knew the strength and weaknesses of themselves and the strength and weaknesses of their adversary. And they had the ability to exploit that. This is going back to Boyd, right? With that maneuver warfare. They knew where the chinks in the armor were, and they had the ability to exploit that and take advantage of their vulnerabilities. So that's why when this helicopter crashed, it could have been a catastrophic failure for the event, but in the end of the day, it was an absolute win. So we're kind of running tight on time here. So let me go with the notion of playing to win and losing. And like I don't think that many of us come to work or go to the firehouse, whether it be career volunteer and with like, oh, we're gonna play to lose today. I mean, I think we all want to play to win, right? But sometimes we do lose. And it's really how you bounce back from that is what I want to talk about, kind of like the notion of resilience. So on the left, we got Timmy Stackpole. He got severely burned in a fire in 1998 and fought for a couple years to come back to work. And at that fire, two other guys got killed, and he could have hung it up right then. Could have hung it up. Instead, he fought to come back to work, and he comes back to work, gets promoted to captain, and he's at headquarters on the morning of September 11th doing some stuff. And our headquarters is right across the river. You could see the World Trade Center from there. And like anybody else, that the events of that morning caused him to respond over, and he subsequently lost his life. So now, how is his wife looking at that? Like this is a guy who was almost killed and now killed. And then what does that family do? They end up growing and becoming an amazing family. One son is a Marine Corps captain, graduated in Annapolis at the Naval Academy. Another son is currently working at Rescue 2 in Brooklyn. And like it's an ultimate picture of resilience. The next picture over is John McCain, shot down over North Vietnam and goes to the Hanoi Hilton, one of the most prolific prisoner of war camps in Vietnam. He has the opportunity when his captors realized who his father was. His father was an admiral in the Navy who was largely in charge of a lot of the naval activity that was going on off the coast of Vietnam, and it gave him the opportunity to go home. And he said, "No, I'm not going home. Like this. I'm not going home unless they're all going home with me." So he proceeded to end up getting tortured multiple times for the next 5 or so years, and then before he was finally released. And then he comes home and leads an absolute life of service for virtually the entire remaining days that he had on Earth. An incredible story of resilience. James Stockdale was another one who was with him. If you guys are ever curious about him, like incredible stories. Moving on, Winston Churchill. During World War One, the Battle of Gallipoli, there was largely due to poor decision making on Churchill's part. Tens of thousands of British troops were put into a bad spot, and about 15,000 got killed. Um, don't quote me on a number, but I believe it was about 15,000. It was he was shunned in British society. It was a terrible moment in time for him. Um, but then we all know that had he not had the resilience and wherewithal to kind of pull himself up by the bootstraps and move forward. And he played to win and he lost and he recognized that. But then he came back to play to win again. And the second time around, I think we could all agree that he 100% won. The gentleman on the right, John Vigiano, the captain of Ladder 176, he retired before I had the opportunity to work with him, but I got to work with a couple of guys that worked with him, which was a pretty cool opportunity for me. He worked in some of the busiest places and some of the busiest times in Brooklyn. And both of his sons, one became a cop, another one became a fireman. And on September 11th, he lost both of them. Now, as a father who loses both of your sons, particularly one who followed in your footsteps of a profession that he absolutely loved and adored, nobody would have questioned him if he just hung it up and kind of became a recluse. But what does he do instead? He became an incredible advocate for wounded members of the military. He was constantly going, he was doing monthly trips down to Bethesda, Chevy Chase, and Walter Reed medical centers in Washington, D.C., visiting wounded troops and things like that. He lobbied the Secretary of Defense to actually go to Iraq and visit the troops overseas as a largely elderly civilian at that point in time. He played to win his whole life and whole career, and in one of the most catastrophic ways, and still found the resilience to come back and continue playing to win. So that is the end of my portion of the show. So I will turn it back over to Dan. And I want to thank all of you very, very much for the opportunity to log on here and listen to me and participate. And hopefully you got something out of it. And if there's any time ops, like anything that we could do from Leadership Under Fire, any kind of inquiries or questions, please reach out to us. We'll have an online program starting up. It's going to be starting in, I think, February, probably early March, actually. Registration will be opening up soon. It'll be an 8-week program, one night a week, and where we're going to take a lot of these concepts and theories and take a real deep dive into them. So if you're ever interested, please jump in. And thanks again.
No, thank you, Dan. So I have a couple things. I mean, it's always overwhelming to hear this because it's like, oh, you think you've got it all, and then, it comes at you and you're like, oh, that, it's a lot of really good information. And at the same time, there's no solutions for a lot of it. And so you're kind of left with like, okay, well, what now? So it's always very interesting to hear. A couple of notes I took for guys that are still that are here. Um, One of the slides you put up talked about the heart rate regression when the tone went off, right? And that's something that I know I remember, when I first got on, our tones we're at 10 and stayed at 10. And now we have progressive tones, and that's something I know a lot of departments are doing. And I think it's helped tremendously, at least how my heart feels when the tones go off, and having it kind of start at a lower volume and work up from there versus starting at volume 10. So that's definitely something that has happened. And I know a lot of, for those guys that have different dispatch like apps and stuff like that, that's something that's been, integrated into a lot of the stuff. From the audio, or I never pronounce it right, audio exclusion or whatever.
Auditory exclusion, right?
Yeah, auditory exclusion. My biggest thing with that is just making sure that your crew knows if you hear something, make sure I know, because if I say, hey, let's go to the floor above, and they say, well, he's a lieutenant, he said go to the floor above, but I didn't hear them say, oh, we're having problems with water because I was worked up and had auditory exclusion. Make sure everyone's telling you everything on the fire ground. Your partner, if you have a crew with you, there's no, oh, well, you're 2 years and I got 6 years, so don't tell me what you heard. Like, make sure I heard it, because I miss shit all the time. Everyone misses shit all the time. So work off of each other. And the last one was, and this is something I do with chiefs fairly often when I walk up to the command post. And this was something I learned from you, from, leadership under fire or whatever. Uh, it's the touch, right? So when someone's on the back side of the curve and you give them kind of a touch, they can sometimes come to the front side of the curve, correct? There's something about that. I
Yeah,
always,
physiological calming response that it's like it's the same reason like again like if you're watching a baseball game or something like that and the pitching coach goes out to a pitcher who's like
yep,
kind of hitting the yips and having a little bit of a rough time, he'll go up, put his hand on his shoulder, be like, "Yo, Dan," and he'll probably make a joke about something that has
right.
absolutely nothing to do with baseball. Like, why'd you buy a pink car? I don't know, whatever. Make a
Yeah.
stupid joke, but it's that natural calming notion.
I do that almost all the time when I go to the command post. I don't make a joke about a pink car, but I do usually like put a hand on the chief's arm and say, "Hey, we're reporting in. What do you need?" And it's not that I don't know if it's made any difference, but it I get look in the eyes and say, "All right, go up here and do this, or go here and do this." So those are some of the takeaways I've had from this type of training. But again, just to reinforce, I mean, this is one night of an hour and a half of something that you guys do, and that you didn't even really mention this, but you guys are doing a full week you do a full week for many departments, ours, and I believe you're in New Britain this week. So real quick, give me what's a week of training about.
A week of training is
Yeah.
it's I don't even like the word training. It's more of an
Right.
education because this is again, there's not a step, there's no 10-step thing, and you can't just like check yourself off. The fire service very much has this like inside the box, very regimented idea of what training is. This is an education. When we do these week-long programs, I would argue that they're even just hitting the wave tops. So I mean, I'm just hitting the wave tops of
Right.
the wave tops. And it kind of follows a similar arc. I believe we believe the necessity in having an understanding in human performance. If you want to be a better leader, you have to have an understanding in human performance. So we take a deep dive into the human performance. We have a lot of discussions, a lot of humbled, like vulnerable discussions. Um, and then we'll go into some of the leadership facets of it. And sometimes, depending on how things are scheduled, we'll actually do like a hands-on tactical day where you can kind of see some of the stuff really. Um, in person in hand, like it really kind of drives a lot of the points home.
Well, awesome. If anyone has any questions, put them in the chat window. Otherwise, unless Dan has anything else, we're probably going to wrap up. As always, thank you all for joining. Dan, thanks for taking the time to do this tonight. It's always a fascinating conversation, kind of hearing, the mental side of things. So, everyone, nothing's there. So either means you did really well or really bad. I don't know. I'll let you know later. Now, no, I got a couple thank yous up there. So thank you for joining us. Thank you everyone on the chat for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you all soon. So have a good night.
Thanks a lot. Take care.
Thank you.